Hello, everyone. Thank you for rejoining us. We had some time complications earlier, but I am happy to say that Sarah is safe and she is well. And it was actually my fault with she said 6:30. It was my fault. I should have known. I'm so bad with these time things, moving from California to Florida. It's such a mess. But Sarah has such a fascinating story, and we are so blessed to be joined with her today. She is extremely brave. She has gone through a DV situation in which a man took the lives of her two precious baby dogs, and he had been attacking her for the duration of their very short relationship, which has not led to enough consequences, in my opinion. So let's get started. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we can follow you in the rest of your story. We could see that at Sarah's story, right? Sarah's Story Official.
Yep, and on Instagram and TikTok mostly.
Okay, great. So can you tell us a little bit can you tell us how this started, like where you met him and everything that was going on?
Yeah, I met him at the start of the COVID pandemic, right when like the entire world had shut down. And I had met him from Bumble. And we had connected through Bumble. And uh, it started getting like really intense right away, like with the things that he was saying to me.
Can you
And
give me an example of like intense, like what you mean by intense?
so after a few messages on Bumble, he asked to connect on Snapchat. And the first message he sent me on Snapchat was this long paragraph saying that he had a really rough upbringing where he had seen his parents die in a car crash,
Oh,
where he was
geez.
raised in foster homes and abused through that. And he ended it saying, "Now this is where you leave me." And like with me being a really compassionate person, I tried to be understanding of, well, just because you have trauma doesn't write you off as a person. But
Wait, I'm confused. So wait, so you met him on Bumble and then you just started talking on Bumble, or did you meet in person first before you guys moved to Snapchat?
we started talking on Snapchat first.
Okay, so like how long after Bumble? Like a week on Bumble, or how quickly were you moving from Bumble to Snapchat?
Like 7 messages. It was like
Oh, wow, really quick.
a few minutes. Yeah.
And so like right after you moved to Snapchat, he started kind of like trauma dumping his entire life story to you.
Yes.
And it was a very sad life story, and we can have like a lot of empathy for those situations. Was he telling you this story so that you could just like know more about him, or was this like a means to justify something he had previously done?
I think it was to try to like manipulate me emotionally, but try to make me feel bad for him and like care for him as kind of like a hook of like care for me in this way.
How did you react to that?
I had responded and I was just very compassionate and said, I'm so sorry for what you've gone through. And again, I'm a very empathetic person. And so I thought, okay, well, I can have compassion for someone who's gone through difficult times.
So, yeah, that makes sense. That's how I think a lot of us would react, especially women. We tend to be empathetic towards people. I don't know, maybe that's me stereotyping. I don't know if that's a woman thing, but I could see that when you're dating someone, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, and you also want to have compassion and love for somebody that you're meeting, that you're attracted to.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened after that? So after Snapchat, you're compassionate and you're showing kindness towards one another.
Yeah. And then he started love bombing right away. Talking about how he had a special feeling about us and how, calling me like beautiful and, just like very love bombing and showing me a lot of attention, which is, how the cycle starts.
Yeah, and also beginning of most relationships too. I mean, all abusive or not all, but I would say a majority of abusive relationships go through the cycle that you're referencing with the love bombing, and then I actually don't know the exact stages of that cycle, but then there starts to be slip ups, and then it becomes progressively um, more egregious until all of a sudden there's a end wall is split and then it goes back to the love bombing. So I understand that cycle that you're referring to, but also the beginning of relationships seem that way, right? A lot of beginning relationships, you have that honeymoon phase. So it could have just seemed like a honeymoon phase as opposed to like a abusive relationship because you haven't gone through anything abusive at this point.
Totally.
Right. So
Yeah.
then what happened after that?
Then he started telling me that he was very depressed and that he was suicidal, but that I gave him hope and that our connection really gave him hope as he was going through a lot in his life. And that I think was really like the start of the cycle too, of I felt like this responsibility that, he's going through a really hard time. He's at this point where he's like suicidal, but he's like feeling connected to me. And so I feel like he put me in that situation of like obligation of caring for him right away.
Right. And did you like fall into that? So did you feel obligated to care for him?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay. So you instantly felt obligated to care for him. Did you have any like romantic attraction to him at this point? Or at this point, did you just now feel obligated to this person?
I would say it was both. Because like I said, he was like love bombing and, making me feel good about myself. And then also saying these things like, that he's really at a low point in life, but that, I'm giving him hope. And so it's kind of like boosting like my ego at the same time as it's like equally manipulative.
Yeah, I understand that. Okay. So then did you guys start hanging out with each other? Did you guys like, what was your relationship looking like?
Yeah. So a week after we matched on Bumble, we met in person for the first time. And it was again during COVID. And so we hung out at my apartment and just kind of had a low key day of watching like a Disney movie and just getting to know each other. And it seemed like, fine for the first time that we were meeting in person and that he was like a normal person.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I never really thought about how COVID could impact the potential safety risks for women trying to date because you never know during COVID, people didn't know when that was going to end.
Mhm.
So you're just kind of stuck with, well, I'm still have to eventually date. And
Yeah.
then it's like, well, you can't go to coffee shops, you can't go to movie, you can't go even to the park in a lot of areas.
Right.
So yeah, that makes sense. That's really scary.
Yeah.
Okay, but like, so you had that interaction, and at this point, he was already emotion, like you were already feeling like you were obligated to him because of the Snapchat messages and such.
Yep.
Okay, and so then how often did he come over after that first hangout?
The next time I saw him in person was about a week later or so. And in the meantime, between us being in person, he had us talking like on the phone or on like video chat, basically from like 6 o'clock in the morning until like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that was like Monday through Friday.
How
Like,
are you able to do that? Did you not have jobs, either of you, or?
he would work as an ambulance driver. And so he would just kind of keep like me on the phone as he had his headphones in. And we weren't like necessarily talking all the time, but he wanted us to be connected like constantly. And then I am a teacher. And right at the start of the pandemic, when everyone in education didn't know what to do, I was only teaching about 2 20-minute classes per day. And so
And were you teaching online?
yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you are talking on the phone a lot. You hang out every once a week in person?
Yeah, for the first couple of weeks, I'd say. Yeah.
Okay. And then did you start hanging out daily, and did you ever move in together, or what did that look like?
We never moved in together, but I did give him a key to my apartment, probably within like a couple of weeks or so. And again, I think that was a lot like due to the love bombing and the constant, oh, like we have a great thing going between us. And really early on, he was saying things like, I'm going to marry you, you know, like I just feel really right about us. And so yeah, I would say we hung out in person maybe like 4 or 5 times before Daisy, because that was very early on into, I want to call it like our time together.
So what happened to Daisy?
That was, well, when he killed her was about like 3 weeks into us knowing each other.
Was it a gradual thing, or was it sudden?
It was sudden.
What happened?
He, and I like didn't know that he was the one who had killed her until 8 months after the fact. But he, when I was teaching via Zoom, he took Daisy into my bedroom to watch her and my dog Kirby while I was teaching. And during that time, he kicked her. And
How do you know that?
because I've worked with a nonprofit organization who has like they had a lawyer on my case, they had an investigator and a veterinarian who specializes in abuse. And they did a forensic analysis of Daisy's like necropsy. And they were able to indicate that this was blunt force trauma. Here's where the wound was inflicted. Here's most likely what type of wound it was. And I remember Daisy had yelped once while I was teaching my class, and he had written it off as, oh, like the two dogs were just playing. But that was when he had kicked her. And then for the next like 2 or 3 hours, he said that he was treating her and caring for her because he had said that he was this top ranking paramedic. And even though I was begging for him to take Daisy to the vet and for us to go to the vet, he refused until it was just about too late. And then about 2 hours after he kicked her, when he finally let me take Daisy to the vet, she passed away like minutes after she got to the vet.
So I'm so sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
When that happened, did you immediately know it was something he did?
I don't know that my mind could go there, because I think when you're in survival mode, you know, your brain kind of protects you from, I think, certain things. But also the vet had done her own necropsy that night and had labeled her cause of death as like a mesenteric rent, saying that like essentially Daisy's insides had gotten like twisted up. And so I didn't know, like I said, until like 8 months after the fact that he was the one who had killed Daisy.
Until 8 months after the fact.
I had suspicions after he killed Kirby.
Yeah. So how long in between the two dogs was it?
About 5 or 6 weeks.
So, okay, so 5 or 6 weeks go by, and in between the 5 or 6 weeks, this entire time, do you have suspicions that he killed your dog, or you're not like what's going on in your mind?
I wasn't sure that he had killed Daisy, but I knew like a couple of days after he killed Daisy, he had started being really rough to Kirby. And now I know obviously it was abuse. And so I had actually sent Kirby to go live with my parents to keep him away from, you know, the abuse. Because by that point, the abuse was getting extremely intense and horrific.
He was like abusing you too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
What was he doing to you?
He was, well, his big threat for me was that his dad was a U.S. Marshal who had ties to the Russian mafia. And it sounds like ludicrous, but he said that like they would track my phone, the location of my car, you know, all of this. And then he would like show me.
Do you believe that to be true to this day?
Now I don't know, but during the time it felt very real.
Okay. What? So, okay, so he was like abusing you psychologically. Did he ever physically abuse you?
Yeah. He would well, he had a German Shepherd, and he would bring his dog over all the time. And a week after he killed Daisy, he actually pinned me down and had his dog attack me.
How did the dog attack you?
He was like, he like held me in a bear hug like this and like really pinned me down and riled the dog up to attack me. And then his dog bit me on my hip and then on my buttocks, and it was bleeding, and it caused me a lot of pain. I still have scars to this day of that.
Did you go to the doctor for that?
No, again, because he was abusing me and telling me that this wasn't a big deal, that I was being too sensitive. How dare that I was reacting this way and like crying, And so it was very much like gaslighting at the same time.
So, okay, so then you went 5 weeks in between this dog, and you went through that dog. Like how soon after Daisy died first, correct?
Yeah.
How soon after Daisy died did this German Shepherd attack?
A week to the day.
So a week later, and then 4 weeks in between. What was happening in that 4 weeks, like going on in your mind? So now, are you still romantically attracted to this person, or are you just with him out of fear?
At this point, it was again like the cycle where, like, I think, well, I don't even want to say like I was attracted to him, because it was just acting as a way of surviving. But it was absolutely like out of fear and like trying to protect myself and my family, because he was threatening to kill my parents constantly. And so everything I did was to placate him, to stop him from being angry, to stop the threats from coming true. And so the entire time that I was with him after that, was just like me fighting for my life every single day.
So, okay, so you felt like you couldn't just like kick him out of, like, take your keys back and kick him out of your apartment, and you couldn't call the cops because he was involved in like the mafia somehow, so he would be able to get around. Did you ever call the cops? Were the cops ever called?
Yeah, after he killed Kirby.
So what happened to Kirby?
So he had made me take Kirby down to his house, under the like idea that he was going to help Kirby get some exercise, because he had like a yard and he was supposed to help Kirby run around. But immediately when I got to his house, he took Kirby away from me, and he said that he was going to give Kirby a bath. And so he took Kirby upstairs and had me stay downstairs in the yard with his German Shepherd. And he started abusing Kirby and just like beating him like viciously. And when I like went upstairs, and this was over the span of an entire day that he was torturing Kirby, every time I would beg him to stop or try to go near him, he would hurt Kirby worse. So for example, like after the bath, he brought Kirby to this couch that he had outside the bathroom to like dry him off. And he had like done something to Kirby in the bathtub where it caused like this, and this is like, it gets really graphic, but he had like the skin on the left side of Kirby's body was just like coming off. And when I started freaking out, Matt started yelling at me and like pinned my dog down and had his dog attack Kirby, to show me to stop and like stand down. And there were many things throughout the day that when he would be hurting Kirby and I would try to like scream and beg him to stop and try to go close, that he would hurt Kirby worse. And
did you ever like consider like running and calling 911 at this point, or?
I couldn't, because it was, I was terrified, and he was threatening me, and I was just in a constant state of fear. And I knew that if I tried to call 911, that he would likely kill me as well. And so there was no option other than really to just like try to placate him throughout the day and do what I could to like stop him from hurting Kirby. So for example, like he was hurting Kirby at his house, and to get him to stop, I started begging him to go out to lunch and asking, can we go out for lunch? And, you know, he said yes. And during that time, like he stopped hurting Kirby. And then after that, and this is important because I know we'll talk about like the legal side of this, but after lunch, he took us to a pond in the area and he hurt Kirby, obviously, at the pond. And to get him to stop, I started begging him to use the bathroom. And I said, I have to use the bathroom. Can we go somewhere where there's a restroom? And so those were the kind of things that I could do throughout the day to get him to stop, while just living in this absolute like
state of fear.
Yeah.
So you went to the police at this point. So Kirby was injured, and then what was the end of the life like for Kirby?
So after he had hurt Kirby at the pond, and I was begging to take him to the ER, finally he let us, and he took us to the emergency room where the vet said, you know, take him to like a specialized, like we're not open overnight, take him to a special ER. And he had made me park my car at a forest preserve throughout the day, so that I was really held captive like to him and in his car throughout the day. And when he drove me back to get my car, and at this point the vet had said that Kirby had 3 broken ribs. He, you know, was obviously really, really not doing well. But when he drove me past my car, I knew that this, you know, I think that's kind of when the trauma bond started to break, because after we had gone to the vet and we knew that Kirby had broken ribs and everything, he continued to hurt Kirby. He pulled us over to a grassy area and continued to hurt him. And I think that's when the trauma bond broke, because I realized, you know, no right person continues to hurt a dog after the vet tells you this is bad. And so he allowed me to take Kirby to another emergency vet in the area. And he wouldn't let me speak on the phone to the vets at all throughout the day. He would take my phone and speak to them for me. And that vet said, we need to keep him overnight. But he told them, no, we're not keeping the dog overnight. And so between that vet, while he was driving me back to my car, I had Kirby in my arms. And that's ultimately when he passed away, is in my arms on the way to my car.
What did you do with the remains?
So he was originally going to take Kirby's body, but I had notified my parents at this point, and my dad was saying, no, you absolutely have to bring his body home, you know, like don't let him like leave with Kirby's body. I'll come down there and get it. And so I brought Kirby's body in my car back home to my parents' house. And that was I think that was when like the weight of the day came crashing down on me, because I had an absolute breakdown. I was just like on the phone with my parents driving home, screaming at the top of my lungs, saying like that I want to die, you know, just absolutely screaming. And when I got to my parents' house, you know, I was just like beside myself in grief, shock, everything. And so my dad took Kirby's body to a local emergency vet in the area. And that was really what, like, I wrote them a letter after everything, and I thanked them for saving my life, because they were the ones who called my dad and said, this was not an accident. You need to call the police. And that's what got my dad in contact with the police.
Were your parents suspicious of him before this?
Yeah.
When, like, how soon into the relationship were they distrustful of him?
I would say maybe like a few weeks into the relationship, because
before Daisy died?
I don't know if it was before. I think probably when Daisy mysteriously died after he entered my life, I think that really was alarming to them. And they were very suspicious of him after that. And they knew that I wasn't acting the same because he was isolating me from my friends and family. And he would get upset at me for talking to my parents. And that was very abnormal because I'm extremely close to my parents. And so they knew that something was wrong and they were terrified for my safety throughout all of it. It was, yeah.
So you call the police, and like which police department responds, and how does it get to the various prosecutors to decide who's going to prosecute and what happened?
Yeah. So my dad called the police down where he lived because that was obviously where it had happened. And they had the animal control officer call me to try to connect with me to hear what happened. But that was the next day. And he had taken my phone and told her, talk to my lawyer, and hung up on her. And he started threatening me that he was going to go kill my dad for contacting the police. And so I started begging my dad to call off the police because, you know, I knew that he was like storming around my apartment. And I, at one point, like had to put myself in front of my door so that he wouldn't leave to go over and kill my dad. But that night I started planning my escape, and I had like a plan to write a letter to escape him. But then he like called me as I was writing it, and I was really terrified that he knew that I was onto something. And so the next day, that Thursday, I planned my escape. And before he came to my apartment, I had my bag packed and everything. And I spent that last day with him acting like everything was normal so that he wouldn't be suspicious and like come through on these threats to kill my parents. But as soon as he left, I went over to my parents' house and I told my family everything. And my sister told me to call the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which I did. And I spoke to an advocate for 2 hours who told me this is one of the top stories she has ever heard, and that if I feel comfortable, I should call the police. And so I hung up with her and I called the police in my area, and they really got started on let me find, you know, information on him. I had told the officer that he had been tracking my car. So the officer told me to go look under my car if he was tracking me, like what to look for. And that's really how things got started.
Okay, so after that got started, you went like a prosecutor called you, correct?
Yeah. So that officer had told me to get an order of protection against him. And so the next day, my mom and I went to the courthouse and I testified in front of a judge.
In which county?
In Cook County. Because both of these two police stations were in Cook County. And I testified in front of the judge, who told me this is one of the most egregious cases he has ever seen. He told me he would be putting his officers at risk to serve my order of protection and to leave the state if I could. And at that point, I did. And in the meantime, I was in contact with these two police departments, and they were the only ones who knew where I had gone when we fled town. And when I came back a week later, I had like interviews set up with each police department to give my statement. And in the meantime, he had been sending me messages on Snapchat saying, hey, the police said you're coming back tomorrow. I'm going to come to your apartment and get my things. And so him sending me those messages was a violation of the order of protection. And actually, when I was interviewing with one of the police departments, we took a break for lunch and I stepped out into the hallway and he was standing right there in the lobby. And so she took me back into the interview room and found out my mom had called 911 because she saw him driving past their house, which is another violation of the order of protection. And so they arrested him on the spot. And that was the only thing that he was ever charged for in regards to my case in Cook County. And he ultimately pleaded guilty to that, even though it was a misdemeanor. But yeah, that was the only charge from Cook County.
So what happened after that? Did you try to call a prosecutor to get something going in terms of prosecuting him for the murder of your dogs in Cook County? Or
Yeah.
what happened there?
I was calling the police like weekly to try to get updates on the investigation, to find out, where they were in the case. And it took them about 8 months to complete their investigation. And they had told me that the state of prosecution was not the same anymore, and that it was harder to get charges pressed. And so in January, 8 months of investigation, both police departments said that they were not pressing charges. And again, that's definitely the state of Cook County. But I had been calling them repeatedly. I had a meeting with one of the prosecutors, asking her to explain to me why they weren't pressing charges. And the entire time she cited that I was basically that I was the problem, and that she wasn't going to press charges against him because there was insufficient evidence, supposedly.
So then you went to a different county, or how did that work? So then what happened then to get the other county to finally press charges against him?
Yeah. So when I mentioned that day with Kirby, he had taken us to the pond. So I realized about a year later that he had actually crossed into Will County. And so I called the prosecutor there, and I saw that they have a special division that works specifically with animal cruelty cases. And I connected with that prosecutor, and I explained my story to him, and he said, okay, file a police report in our county, and then, we'll see what happens. And so I had moved out of state after everything because there was, so much trauma in, where I had grown up. And so I flew back to Chicago for one day. I went and I filed a police report in Will County. And then I didn't hear from them for 5 or 6 months. And I just assumed that nothing had happened because this, there's a 2-year statute of limitations on animal cruelty in Illinois. And so the 2-year date came and went. And it wasn't until a couple weeks later that I was actually doing another interview. And she mentioned, oh, I see this article that he was arrested and charged for, torturing and killing Kirby. And I called the prosecutor right away. And I said, if you remember me, we spoke on the phone. Was he charged? And the prosecutor said, yes. We charged him with 2 counts of animal cruelty and then 1 charge of animal torture. And
are they using any evidence from the other county, or are they only able to use the evidence from within the county that they have?
I'm not sure. I know because I had filed, I sued him, and that was a huge part of this, I'm sure. And so my case was really packaged neatly up for them, where it was in the lawsuit. It had the vet reports, it had pictures, and I'm sure.
So your private lawsuit was prior to the criminal suit, correct? So they were able to use your private lawsuit as evidence against him, or because usually it's a higher standard, but
I think so. I think the fact that I won the lawsuit, especially for a huge amount, because it was a personal lawsuit where I sued him individually, and I won it for over $162,000. And so the same evidence that Cook County had turned down, Will County said, yes, this is sufficient. And, they had to bring it in front of a grand jury for felony cases. And a grand jury saw all of the evidence and indicted him. So clearly they know that there, is enough evidence to prove that he did this.
So what did you have to testify in court in front of him in order for the criminal charges in order for him to be prosecuted?
I had to testify in front of him for the lawsuit, but I have not yet had to do anything for the criminal charges yet.
Is he okay? But so he hasn't faced trial yet.
Correct. They actually have court tomorrow where they might decide if this will go forth to trial, or if he would take a plea deal, for example.
Okay, so people could follow you on Instagram or TikTok if they wanted updates on the story.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, great. What has the process been like? Because I also saw on your Instagram you talking about gun safety and how you talked in front of some Can you explain what happened with the court system and your talk in front of a judge?
Yeah. So when I had to testify to get the order of protection, one of the things that he had been threatening me with is a gun, and said that he had a gun in his car at home and that he would use it obviously on me and to kill my parents. And so the judge ordered that he turn over his guns as part of this order of protection. And when I spoke to the police about, how they serve the order of protection, and I asked if they were going to take his guns away, the police said there's really no way for them to enforce that because
I'm pretty sure it's a self-surrender, right? Because they don't know who has how many guns, right?
yeah,
Because there's not like a federal registry, so they don't know.
right.
Right. So what was there like legislation that you wanted to see put in like enacted to help domestic violence survivors?
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I think there's a lot of laws that should be changed. I think, especially with like online dating, there should be like some kind of registry or way to know that these abusers are using their platforms. Because I, like with my personal case, I have had at least 15 other victims find me through social media, and almost every single one of them connected with him over online dating. And so I think legislation needs to change, or at least be in place for, somebody who has an active order of protection or prior orders of protection. Like, how are they able to just freely use these dating sites?
That's interesting, because right now there's only that sort of registry for children, correct? There's not anything for like adults who are abusive towards other adults. But there, that is a major issue with these dating apps, and I really deeply understand that. I've been in a very similar situation where I met someone who has been prior abusive, and I only went on one date with him, thank God, but then he was charged with the prior abuse. But it's just scary because like he was still out there on dating apps, and there should be some sort of limitation, at least for these dating companies, or some responsibility for these dating companies to maybe look into the people who are on their apps.
I think so, because I had notified a couple of these apps explaining my story, and they had banned him at least on Bumble and Tinder. But I now know that he's on there using fake names. And so, and
What?
he
Do you know what the fake names are?
I know one of them was Brad, like
Brad Barry?
Brad Evans.
Brad Evans. Brad Evans.
I think the
Okay.
other one I heard was Sam Smith.
Isn't that these are like so generic, but Sam Smith, isn't that also a musical artist?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Weird.
Yeah.
Interesting. Have you noticed, like, with the girls that have connected with you, was there a pattern of him like abusing their pets?
They, not from what I've heard with their pets, but like for their stories of abuse are almost identical to mine, where they threaten, he threatened their families, that he had connections to the police and these mafias. And at least one other victim had seen him abusing his own dog. But I always ask and see, are your pets okay? And so far,
is he still working as an ambulance driver?
I don't believe so. He had mentioned in court that he was fired from that job. So I don't know anything beyond that.
Interesting. And do you feel safe now?
I do, for the most part. I think moving out of state helped. He has since I'm active on social media, has sent me harassing messages on social media, but I took that to court and I got the order of protection extended. And then I just go and update the prosecutor. And so, anything he tries, I just take it to the authorities and, do what I can with that.
But he doesn't really seem to be following court orders, correct? Like, court says come to court. He doesn't necessarily show up. His mug shots are kind of smirkish. Like, we could show some of his stuff right here if we want to. So like this is him.
People have been asking for better pictures of his face, and so I'll get out of the way, but this is him. This is Matthew Berry. This is his mugshot for when he was charged with the fatal beating and torture of my dog Kirby. So again, that's his mugshot. Again, all public record, which are the only types of pictures that I post of him. And then this is his mugshot from when he skipped court back in February. This is his mugshot from being arrested then. So that's him. Again, he is currently going through court for the fatal beating. And
that's pretty wild that he's just like out here still. And then these are your two little precious doggies right here.
Yeah.
So I think that this is probably one of the worst cases that I've ever heard of DV. And now you're married though, correct?
Yeah.
So you're out of the dating scene.
Yeah.
How did you know like that this person was healthy and like that you weren't falling into the same traps of unhealthy relationships?
Yeah, well, after the abuse, I did not date for 2 years while I was going through really intensive therapy to heal from it and to identify like, you know, red flags and also to feel comfortable dating again. And, you know, because you have this fear that, you know, all relationships will be like this again. But my current husband, he just like right away, like he was so understanding of everything.
Was
like,
he the first person you dated since this abusive relationship?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and I locked him down.
Okay. That's a little scary though. Like it's literally the first person since getting out of something so scary and then to like lock into something so serious.
Yeah. Well, I had like talked to a couple other guys like beforehand. I wouldn't say that I dated them because it wasn't anything more than talking. And there was one guy that had actually like very similarly like trauma dumped right away. And I took that to my therapist and I right away was like, no, this isn't like right. And I took it to my therapist. And so there were a couple like examples of no, I won't stand for that. But then I knew like my current husband was like very understanding, and it took me a little while to allow him like around my pets. Because now I have, you know, 2 new dogs who are Daisy's siblings.
How does he treat them?
I don't know if anyone could love them more than me, but he comes pretty darn close to it.
That's great. That's good to hear. Well, I really appreciate your time. There's so much more to this story. It's such like an in-depth story. Please follow on Instagram, on TikTok, why don't you give yourself a shout out with anything that you want us to know, and also following the court updates to see what's happening with him.
Yeah, just there on like my Instagram under Sarah Story Official, and TikTok is Sarah Story. And then I also have a little podcast going, which is mostly just me going in depth about like every detail of the abuse. And that's just Sarah Story Podcast, but mostly Instagram and TikTok is where I'm the most active.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing your story. This is a very hard story, especially because with these types of situations, I think a lot of people feel a lot of guilt, especially because you do fall for a lot of manipulation while you're in this situation. And when looking back at it, it's hard to look back at, especially when you start seeing your own faults. And so to be so open with everything that happened and what happened to your poor doggies, and to try to warn other women about him, and to try to put yourself out there for the betterment of other women is something extremely difficult to do. And people will try to bring you down for that. And you just are such an amazing person. And thank you so much for fighting the good fight. And I hope that you get all the justice you deserve.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Alrighty. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.